Mayor, just confirming we're live.
Thanks, Carly.
Do I please you just a minute?
Be close. 30 seconds. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our first Ordinary Council meeting for 2021. Welcome to our councillors tonight and anybody viewing live stream. I would like to invite Councillor James to please do the Welcome to Country. Councillor James, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Firstly, I pay my respects to our ancestors and also acknowledge our elders, both past, present and emerging. I would like to acknowledge the Yorta Nations and all its people whose land we meet on today. So on behalf of the Elders Council, the 16 family groups and the 8 respected tribes, I welcome you all to this wonderful land and country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'd also like to begin by we, Greater Shepparton City Council, acknowledge the Yorta peoples of the land, which now comprises Greater Shepparton. We pay our respect to their tribal elders, we celebrate their continuing culture and we acknowledge the memory of their ancestors. Item number 3, privacy notice. This public meeting is being streamed live via our Facebook page and made available for public access on our website along with official minutes of this meeting. Item 4, governance principles. Council considers that the recommendations contained in this agenda gives effect to the overarching governance principles stated in section 9/2 of the Local Government Act 2020. These principles are noted within the agenda tonight from number 1 through to number 9. Item 5, any apologies you're received. Council, do we have any declarations of conflict of interest to declare tonight? No. Item number 7, confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. Is any item of the minutes opposed? No. Would a council like to move the recommendation on page 7? The minutes of the 15th of December 2020 council meeting as circulated be confirmed. Councillor Dobson?
Mute.
You are on mute, Councillor Dobson.
I got caught. I move the recommendation that the minutes of the 15th of December 2020 council meeting as circulated be confirmed.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Brophy. We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried, unopposed. CEO Peter Harriet, do we have any public questions tonight?
No, we don't tonight.
Thank you very much. Councillors, we'll turn to page 8 on the agenda, item 9.1, community engagement policy. There's also a recommendation on page 8. Would a councillor like to move a motion, please? Councillor Abdullah.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I would like to move the motion that the council adopt the community engagement policy 07.4.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Sali. You're on mute.
Sorry, Mayor O'Keefe. Yeah, look, I'll second that motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, quickly. Basically, this policy update, community engagement policy update is due to the updates to Victorian Local Government Act 2020. And the draft community engagement policy was released for public comment from 15 January 2021 for 2 weeks. And we received 4 submissions. Basically, it is a legislative requirement to have this policy updated by 1st of March. Along with other policies which have to be updated within 6 months of general election. The main updates in this policy are mainly about including deliberative engagement practices in certain matters, such as when we are developing council vision, council plan, financial resources plan, and asset plan, etc. The policy talks about the 2 types of consultation that the community engagement policy will include. One is consultative, which we are all very familiar with. It includes, it's basically about informing and consulting. But a new type of consultation is the deliberative consultation, which is basically going to involve, collaborate, and empower the community. So that's a key change there. This form of engagement has been used, according to my knowledge, it has been used by some councils in the past, but not many. And of course, in Greater Shepparton, this will be a very new form of community engagement. I am looking forward to seeing it in action. And even though there are many unknowns and around this whole process of deliberative engagement, but it will be, we'll be very keen to see how it all pans out. This community engagement policy also talks about where these 2 types will be used. So consultative will be more around making local laws and budget and governance rules, whereas deliberative engagement will be, it is a legislated obligation, and it includes matters such as community vision, council plan, and financial plan and asset plan. Other than that, it is also important to note that the community engagement relating to planning permit applications and planning scheme amendments, they are outside the scope of this policy, because those matters are governed by Planning and Environment Act. So the policy will also be accompanied by a procedure and toolkit, and I think more details around the specifics of the process of community engagement and the tools that will be utilized to conduct this community engagement will be included in those 2 documents at a later stage. So yeah, so that's about, basically that is about the community engagement policy updates. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Sully, excuse me for a moment.
Mayor Kim, if I might just note that the computer has a notice to say that it may restart shortly. So if we do lose connection, we will sort that out and come back, but don't be alarmed. So I just need to give you that advice. Okay, please continue.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Sully, would you like to speak to the motion?
Very briefly, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Look, Councillor Abdullah covered it off very well. But look, the main priority with this is to make sure us as council and as councillors deliver on community expectations. And by doing that, we have to have a strong community engagement, and this policy enables that. So, yeah, I think it's great that we get to have this put in place now.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Brophy?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Just in regards to that, well said on Councillor Abdullah and also Councillor Sali, just supporting this particular community engagement policy. Yes, it is legislative. Yes, it does seem a little bit bureaucratic in the way that it's going about, and we don't want to be caught up into analysis paralysis and just re-looking at it for the sake of looking at it. We want to make it real. We want to make sure that the deliberate engagement, that we're actually out there talking to the people. It became very clear throughout our campaign that the community wanted to be engaged. They want to be part of the decision-making process, and they want to be representative by not only by us but by themselves, by being heard. And I think this is going certainly a way towards that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 13, item 10.1, contracts awarded under delegation, November 2020 to January 2021. There's also a recommendation on page 13. Would a council like to move a motion, please? Councillor Sarley.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Yeah, look, I'd like to move the recommendation as a motion on page 13 of the agenda, item 10.1.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor James. Councillor Sarley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Look, there's obviously a number of contracts that have already been awarded and others that will also go out to tender. So there's a lot of work currently underway and forecast, which is fantastic to see across Greater Shepparton. Out of the contracts that have currently been awarded, I just wanted to make note of the works underway at Deakin Reserve here in Shepparton. With the construction of the new netball court that will also have lighting and shelter also being built for those that frequent the ground. That will be highly utilised and has been needed for a number of years now as well. And also the construction of new toilet amenities and an entrance shed. I drove past there last week and the entrance looks completely different. So, you know, this is almost $700,000 being invested into this space. And as you know, what makes it even better is that two local contractors are completing the works with Jarvis, Delahaye and Moretto's. So great work all round.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sarley. Councillor James, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor O'Keefe. No, Councillor Sarley's summed it up. It's self-explanatory, really. There is 16 contracts awarded and most are local, which is very encouraging to see. And there are 4 tenders advertised but not yet awarded. So very good to see the local contractors working in that area.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Dobson?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I wanted to just point out that it's not only Shepparton that's been being funded in these works, but looking at Tatura, for example, and over at Kidstown, and also some of the other Kyla North. So it's not, and Mooroopna, so it's not just in Shepparton. So it's great to see these works being done. And it's great to see the works being done in a time when we're going through some pretty difficult times. So I congratulate the team on getting these works out.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dobson. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Only to point out for clarification for the public that contract 2040 supply of resource recovery glass bins is not curbside being rolled off across the municipality. This is actually for our transfer station. So before we get barraged with questions, it's still early days with the curbside. This is for our transfer station, another option to recycle.
Thank you very much for that. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Priestley?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I just wanted to talk briefly on contract 2083, which is the traffic calming infrastructure Mooroopna, and point out that there's been a detailed traffic study of that area of Mooroopna, and I think we're all familiar with the rat run that is the trip from Shepparton to Mooroopna or vice versa. And, you know, for residents living in that area, it's a pretty ordinary result at the moment. This is the first steps, and that council will be working comprehensively to try and improve road conditions in that area.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to item 10.2 on page 18, Councillor Code of Conduct. There's also a recommendation on page 18. Would a councillor like to move a motion, please? Councillor Abdullah?
I would like to move the recommendation that the council, move the recommendation as the motion that the council adopt the Council Code of Conduct dated 16 February 2021 and revoke all previous versions.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brophy? Councillor Brophy?
I second the motion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Just quickly, again, this is about updating the Councillor Code of Conduct due to changes in the Local Government Act 2020, and it needs to be updated so that it complies with the Act. The Code of Conduct, it includes the standards of conduct that are expected to be observed by councillors when they are performing their duties and functions. The draft of this Code of Conduct was prepared by Macquarie local government lawyers, and it was discussed with councillors, and councillors had an opportunity to provide some inputs. And so there was this workshop which happened, and I think all the concerns and feedback was taken care of in finalizing this Code of Conduct. The standards of code, basically it is not, those standards are not intended to limit any debate, but they basically set the standards so that we can work effectively and efficiently with each other. The standards in the Code of Conduct include aspects such as treatment of others, and while performing the role of councillors, what are the requirements, compliance with good governance measures, and also the aspect which talks about that councillors must not distract or discredit or mislead council or public. So these standards of code are important. They are, and it is very important and necessary to have an understanding and agreement on this Code of Conduct so that we can work effectively and also to the best interest of our community. Of course, not following the Code of Conduct can have serious repercussions for the whole organization, and it can lead to a dysfunctional council, which basically ultimately puts the community at a disadvantage. So I'm satisfied with the Code of Conduct at this stage that has been formulated, and I'm particularly pleased with the dispute resolution process compared to the previous Code of Conduct. I think the dispute resolution process in this version has been clarified and has been simplified, and it's a process which I feel is much easier to comprehend and follow. So I support this Code of Conduct.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brophy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Thank you, Councillor Abdullah. You've really summed that up beautifully. It is a very important document. It is an important document when we start a council term to go through all of the changes that have taken place. It is legislative, but it's also important that we understand what it's all about. And I think really there's one word that does sum that up, and it's about respect. But I think you've summed it up very well. Thank you, Councillor Abdullah.
Thank you, Councillor Brophy. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Summer?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I've just mentioned that it's also integrated with other policies and documents that we have on board, including governance rules and others. But those will be coming up for review, so we'll have to abide by them until we review them, and I'm sure we're all more than capable of that. So it's a broad overview of how we should behave. It hasn't changed all that much. Quite comfortable. It's fine.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? We now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 21, item 10.3, the complaints policy, 37.POL 8. There's a recommendation also on page 21. Would a council like to move a motion, please? Would someone like to move that? Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'll move the recommendation as a motion that the council adopt the complaints policy 37.POL 8.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Sarley.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'll second that motion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dobson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, more often than not, any local government being closest to the people will receive a fair amount of complaint, and how that's handled is the point of this exercise. Just a couple of points, and I'm just reading here, so if you don't mind if I do that. The policy provides clear direction to members of the community on what constitutes a complaint, how a complaint can be lodged, who the complaint can be addressed to, and how it will be managed. And I think that how it will be managed is an important aspect. I believe that if you're going to make a complaint to council, you should be assured that somebody's going to receive it, somebody is going to act on it, and somebody's going to give you a response to it. And I think that's the main thing. We're always going to get complaints, and I'd rather than call them complaints, I'd rather call it interaction in the public, because if we need to be shown something that is not happening, I think it's important that we get shown that by the public. So I'm very happy to endorse this motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dobson. Councillor Sarley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, briefly, thanks, Mayor O'Keefe. Look, following on from the comments that Councillor Dobson mentioned, but in sort of my own way, that I'd like to think that this policy wasn't needed. But obviously at times there will need to be complaints raised with council, and as Councillor Dobson raised, it's about how we receive these complaints and how we provide feedback to the community. And I think well done to council by having an open arm approach, that we want to hear the feedback, we want to continue to improve and keep offering all the great things that we currently do for our community. So yeah, I think it's great to have this in place.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sarley. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? We will now go, Councillor James.
Just further to add, Mayor O'Keefe, we've had, over the last, since our term, we've had some complaints from the community, and I think that we've handled them, appropriately and effectively, and it's good, and we encourage the community to continue to do that, because it actually is the community is our eyes and our ears out there. So I think it's very good, and we respect that feedback into the council too as well.
Thank you, Councillor James. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 24, item 10.4, the January 2021 monthly financial report. There's also a recommendation on page 24. Would a council like to move the motion, please? Councillor Abdullah.
Thank you. I would like to move the motion that the council receive and note the January 2021 monthly financial report.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Priestley.
I second the motion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I will just provide a quick snapshot of this report, and we will kind of cover our next report as well, which is about Q2 forecast. Now, this January monthly financial report, basically this report is for noting, and it is in line with the transparency and good governance principles, and council receives this report every month. This report has 5 key sections. I'll start with operating performance. It also includes income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement, and capital works statement. So talking about the operating performance, which is our adjusted underlying surplus or deficit as a percentage of adjusted underlying revenues. Our year-to-date actual performance in terms of percentage, which is 28.16%, it is tracking well. It is higher than the year-to-date adopted forecast for Q1, which is mainly due to increase in cost growth, user charges, and working for Victoria reimbursement was ahead of schedule. The projected full year value is for operating performance is minus 10.62%, which is within the acceptable local government target range. But it is not within council's own target range. So there are several reasons for this. One of the reasons is that most of the times we receive get early receipt of 50% of the 2020 and 2021 federal financial assistance grants, and which is actually a revenue for our current financial year, but because it was received in May, it could not be recorded as a revenue for this financial year. So that's something that we have to be mindful of while reading this report. And the second reason for this operating performance is also because the operating, there was a reduced operating income due to closure and restricted operations of council services as a result of COVID pandemic. That's about the operating performance. In terms of our financial obligations, loans and borrowings as a percentage of rates, the report shows that the projected full year percentage is 28.74%, which is again within the local government target of 0 to 70%. I am satisfied that council has a level of borrowing that is appropriate to its activities, and we have a strong capacity to meet our long-term obligations. I also want to note that this projected full year percentage, it includes the $10 million borrowing, which at the moment we are holding, and we don't, because we don't need it right away. And by doing that, we are also not being charged interest at this point in time, but it will happen going forward. In terms of working capital, again, it's
time, Councillor Abdullah. Would you like an extension?
Can you please, because there are so many indicators.
In favour for an extension for SEMA, for Councillor Abdullah? Approved.
Thank you. So I'll just quickly mention that working capital, which is current assets as a percentage of current liabilities, it is satisfying our VAGO's specified low risk liquidity level. Again, it's a balancing act for council, how to what level of liquidity to maintain. Too much liquidity can be seen, or too high of a liquidity can be seen as council holding too much of cash from ratepayers fund. So it is a balancing act. In terms of, again, rates debtor, it is going smoothly. We have 493 payment arrangements out of 33,165 rate assessments. So it does seem that there has been a little bit of increase due to COVID, but it's very, the whole hardship payment arrangement, when we look at the overall overall rates assessment, the total number of rates assessment, it is fairly low. Our investments are going well, but just to point out that the interest rates, we all know that the interest rates are low, and the forecast is that they will remain low. So it definitely has an impact on council's interest revenue. In this report, we will notice that the investments have been specified as A1 plus, A1, A2, and others. I would hope that in going forward, we can get, as a part of this report, we can also get some indication of our green investments, so that we are comfortable about how council is investing in green arrangements, and we want to have environmental friendly investments. So I think I'll stop at this point. Have I reached my time limit?
Just about.
Okay. So I think it's a very detailed report, but again, notes that are accompanying this report are very important to read. So I would encourage everyone to not look at the numbers only, but also go and understand what's happening underneath those numbers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Priestley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'll just highlight a couple of variations and make a couple of comments about that for this report and the coming quarter review. The first one that I'd like to mention is that I guess if you look at our progress on our capital projects, the state of the year that we're at and how much is drawn down, on a pro rata basis, we're lagging a bit behind that. I guess I want to give members of the public confidence that we've been talking to council officers about that, and whilst there's still a way to go, there's some big parts of projects still to be delivered in the latter part of the year, and we're broadly on track to deliver that capital budget. The second thing that I'd like to mention is that we're seeing a fairly significant increase in waste volumes. So when we look at that from a financial point of view, there's more revenue coming into the council, but it does beg the question about investing in either additional capacity for our landfill and the broader question about our future waste strategies. So the reason for that additional waste is not necessarily that we're generating more, but that we're seeing commercial operators use this region more, again, rather than going outside of the region. But I just make that point. And Lastly, the Covert Effect. I just want to talk quickly about that. So, you know, if you think about council as a business, roughly $150 million in turnover. In this financial year, we've got a net effect of about $4.3 million on our budget. Council hasn't been sitting on its hands, so the gross effect is about $6.5 million. There's a couple of $1 million in savings council's been able to make, but it's still a $4.5 million hit on budget. If you think about COVID overall and the net effect, so 4 and a bit in this year, it's 6 and a bit if you look over the term of the COVID period. So it is that they are quite significant headwinds against the total budget of $150 million, $6 million net across the 2 financial years. So I just wanted to make those points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Priestley. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. There's 11 pages of attachments to go with this, and I'm like the other speakers. I suggest that if the ratepayers have got a chance to have a look at it, because it's very interesting. One of the things, or a couple of points that I looked at, and there's plenty of points to look at this, reduction in parking fees over the time is $586,000, and it's an important issue and it highlights, I suppose, when you're talking about free parking. So that's an interesting one. Councillor Priestley talked about the increase in the commercial waste. We're up by 2.5 mil on that, and that's because I believe that we operate that at a pretty commercially a good rate, and that's important. A lot of the services like Aqua Moves and East Bank and the showgrounds have taken a bit of a hit, and I've calculated quickly about $600,000 on that due to COVID-19. So there's lots and lots of factors that come into it, but the one that I like is our current assets over current liabilities at 104%, 84 million current assets, 34 million current liabilities, 104% or thereabouts. And that's a pretty good ratio to be looking at. So, look, in line with the other speakers, a good result today, but I don't think it's time for rejoicing. I think we've got a long way to go, and these last 3 or 4 days have proven that not only ourselves, but our ratepayers are back into it, back into lockdown. And I think we must be cognizant of exactly all the pressures that are on us at the moment, and I guess we will be. So the forecast will be interesting going forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 26, item 10.5, the 2020-2021 quarter forecast review. There's also a recommendation on page 26. Would a councillor like to move a motion, please? Councillor Priestley.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd like to move the motion in line with the recommendation on page 26 that the council receive and note the 2020-2021 quarter 2 forecast review.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Abdullah. Councillor Priestley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, Mayor O'Keefe, so the comments that I've made are pertinent for the last report and this one. Broadly, the business continues to track roughly in line with budget. I've talked about some of those high-level changes that I wanted to draw to the attention of the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thank you. I think in this respect, I'll quickly just highlight about the projected full year income as a forecast. It is projected as 2 million less than adopted quarter 1 forecast. And one of the reasons that it is so is that Working for Victoria program income, which was based on total staff strength, is less than projected because there have been less staff and less staff were hired than what was planned. Again, it is a bit of a disappointment because we could have done so much better, but Working for Victoria actual numbers, fund numbers are much lower than what we were expecting. So hence there's a review. The forecast is giving us a different picture. As it has already been said, some of the statutory fee is less than the previous forecast, and this is mainly due to reduced parking infringement income. And so this is from the income side of things. In terms of expenses, there's the projected full year expense variance is $4.6 million, which is, again, the reasons are because we have employee staff vacancies, we have employee costs, which are less than the previous forecast, and mainly due to the Working for Victoria Fund staff numbers. So again, on surface, I think looking at the expense variance, sometimes it appears that it is positive, that the expenses have been reduced due to employee costs. But however, in reality, as I've just noticed in this one, in reality, what it means is that less jobs were filled that could and should have been filled. So that's this point about Working for Victoria and how it is impacting our forecast review. I just wanted to highlight that overall, the accounting surplus projected full year is 9.29 million compared to adopted budget surplus of 5.2 million. And our underlying profit is also showing a deficit of 16.8 million, which is slightly less than the adopted budget deficit of $17.9 million. So that's about the quarter two forecast. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any council like to speak against the motion? Would any council like to speak for the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 30, item 10.6, rates rebate for retail land occupied by charitable organisation policy. There's also a recommendation on page 30. Would a councillor like to move a motion, please? Councillor Brophy.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd like to move the recommendation that the council adopt the rates rebate for retail land occupied by charitable organisations policy as detailed on page 30 of the agenda.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor James. You're on mute. Councillor James.
Sorry, Councillor. Sorry, Mayor. Okay.
Would you like to second that one? Yep.
Yep. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brophy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. As per the recommendation, it is for a rates rebate for retail land occupied by charitable organisation. What that actually means is it's not just for not-for-profit organisations, but a very distinctive distinction that it has to be a charitable organisation. The rebate is 50% when it applied upon application, and it's to the general rate, but also to the municipal charge for retail land that is occupied by a charitable organisation where the sale of goods at the premises contributes to the organisational or the organisation's objectives. Now, there are a number of places here in the Golden Valley that do qualify for that. There are probably a number of ones out there that may be not aware of it. So this is a bit of an advertisement as well to make sure that if you think that you do fit into that particular category for a rebate, and 50% is certainly worth applying for, to contact the council officers to see whether or not you do fall into that eligibility. But certainly have to be a charitable organisation, not just a not-for-profit. And it is a very good thing that with the policy that we put forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor James, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, Mayor O'Keefe, thank you very much. No, well, the organisations that were successful in gaining that, you know, they're worthy organisations and they're vital for our community. So it's very pleasing to see that those organisations did get that rebate.
Thank you very much, Councillor James. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Abdullah.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I would just like to highlight again another important point, that this policy is it's not mandatory to offer this 50% rate rebate as per the Local Government Act, but council is doing it. And it is basically to acknowledge the benefits of charity organizations to our community. So I'm very pleased to have this policy in place. It is also important to note that this policy is not applied retrospectively, and it is only for the current financial year. So eligible organizations, charitable organizations have to apply. So I would encourage all the charitable organizations to make use of this policy and get the 50% rebate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 33, item 10.7, the Council Plan 2020 to 2021, the Q1 Progress Report. There's also a recommendation on page 33. Would a councillor like to move a motion, please? Someone like to move that motion? Councillor Summer?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'll move that the council notes the Council Plan 2020 to 21 Q1 Progress Report.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Dobson? Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
Sure. The council plan is the Bible of what we do, basically. So we put the nuts and bolts together in this plan, and then for the next 4 years of our term, we try to envision and realise as much of that plan as possible. So this is sort of a report card to the community on how we tracked and how we are tracking. And we're currently working on our next council plan as a new group. And that's been an exciting process so far. Looking forward to seeing how that pans out, whether there's many major changes or whether we should keep going down this track. Obviously, there's some areas like cycling where we're really not hitting the goals, but there's also a lot of green traffic lights in there that shows that we have achieved quite a bit in the last 4 years. So it's interesting, and I encourage the community to have a look.
Thank you very much, Councillor Summer. Councillor Dobson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just quickly, I think Councillor Summer has done it very well, but the two main areas that I would look at, one is the legislative requirements regarding things like municipal health and wellbeing. But there's also the things that we want to put into it ourselves, and social, economic and natural environments. And after our briefings today, when we talked about a number of issues, I think we're doing very well. The themes that we've been looking at is leadership and governance, and I guess that's what the community is looking for. Social themes, economic, which is probably in my mind one of the more important, to build and provide support for infrastructure that makes Shepparton a place that you want to be in, and the environment. And the environment is becoming more and more important because we're looking at the policy, the climate emergency policy that was moved and passed last year. And I think the policies that, or the programs that we have in store going forward will have that in mind. It's interesting that with the COVID-19 coming in now, that there's a lot of people looking to have tree changes, and I think it's important that Greater Shepparton, not only the city of Shepparton, but also the areas of Tatura and Murchison, Dookie, what have you, are able to provide the right framework for families to be coming in. And this council is able to provide those frameworks that the communities can rely on. So this is a very important policy, and it's a very good report. And I'd like to think that our ratepayers had a good look at it in the attachments.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor James.
Thanks, Mayor O'Keefe. Yeah, just to back up what's been already said, there are five key themes to the plan, and just to reinforce what has been said, from an economic point of view, it's really important for us to continue to incentivize our business investments throughout the town too, as well, so that our town does keep growing and evolving, and also the environment, from the environment point of view too, as well. Protect and clean and green environment, and continue to beautify and make our town looking very green and very clean as well. So, thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor James. Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 36, item 11.1, the Affordable Housing Reference Group, Terms of Reference and Endorsement of Committee Members. There's also a recommendation on page 36. Would the council like to move a motion, please? Councillor Spinks.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I would like to move the recommendation to a motion as it is printed on page 36 of the agenda.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Summer. Councillor Spinks, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd like to just quickly highlight, first of all, congratulate the community members that are being appointed to the reference group. The reference group is going to be a really wonderful collaboration of key stakeholders across our region, and it's a very important space. Obviously, housing affordability is a key issue across our region, and this is going to be a really important way to collate the knowledge, experience, and abilities and capacity of our region within this one sort of group. And by having the community representatives as well, they bring their own wealth of knowledge to it. So I'm very supportive of not only the Affordable Housing Reference Group itself, but I think the terms of reference is well thought out, well written, and will support them well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to congratulate Tanya Tonks, Rebecca Lorraine and Bruce Mactia for putting their hands up as the community representatives. Now, my understanding from reading the report is that we only had space for 2 community representatives, but it's increased to 4, I believe. And that's just because there's an understanding that the community have a lot of inside knowledge that health professionals may not necessarily know about. And council aren't traditionally involved in this level of housing. It's only through recent changes to the Local Government Act that we've managed to get involved. So these are all our preliminary steps in building a really strong foundation so we can understand the issues better and we can move forward on policy and get some changes happening on the ground. I'd like to see some short-term solutions in the meantime, because this does seem like a bigger than Ben-Hur project, but this community group is one step in the right direction, and everything we do in the space of housing is exciting, because we're only as strong as our weakest link, and there's quite a few people out there that don't even have a home. So when you think of their outcomes without a home, it kind of hits home, I suppose. So it couldn't be a more important space for us to be active in, and I support it 100%.
Thank you very much, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak for the motion? Councillor Abdullah.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I agree with everything that Councillor Spinks and Councillor Summer have said. I mean, this is amazing given the enormity of the problem, homelessness problem or affordable housing problem in our region. It is a great step to have all the key stakeholders and knowledgeable and passionate community members to come together through this platform and talk to each other, join hands in addressing this issue, and of course with their relevant knowledge and expertise, guide the council to develop the solutions, be it short term, be it long term. So, and I acknowledge Councillor Summer's point about having short term solutions. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to the discussions and the outcomes that we'll see through the formation of this reference group. So I totally endorse that.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Brophy.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd just like to endorse what fellow councillors have said. It is very much a key issue, this area of affordable housability in the region. It's one of my pet areas that I'm wanting to make sure that we can, as a council, make a difference to. Fantastic, we've got this up and running in terms of the reference group and the terms of reference that are put out there. And I'm really heartened by the community representatives that we've got on there. I know them, and I think outstanding people to have as representatives on that particular group. So well done.
Thank you very much. Would any other council wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Sarley?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Look, I just want to very briefly echo the comments of my fellow councillors in the fact that we are very, very fortunate to have strong community representatives that are willing to put their hand up, volunteer their time and have a contribution to better outcomes. So, you don't have to sit on as a councillor or anything like that to have an impact in our community. And I encourage others out there that are listening or get wind of this, that you can put your hand up, you can contribute to the direction of our community. So well done to those three that have put their hand up.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sarley. Would any other council wish to speak to the motion? And I'll just add a couple of comments before we go to the vote, that it's I'm incredibly hopeful now that we have so much happening within the homelessness space and affordable housing. Having council having this on board and working with so many across the community, it's coming together, all those loud voices that are making a difference. We know we recently got $45 million from state government for housing, and we know that that needs to continue, and this is the type of committee and workforce that's going to make that happen. All right, we'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 42, item 11.2, the Heritage Advisory Committee, terms of reference. There's also a recommendation on page 42. Would a council like to move a motion, please? Councillor Dobson?
I'd like to, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd like to move the recommendation on page 42 that states that the council adopt the amended terms of reference for the Greater Shepparton Heritage Advisory Committee.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Summer. Councillor Dobson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Just briefly, this is just updating the terms of references that started back in 2012. In fact, I was around when that happened, and it was quite something new to have a Heritage Advisory Committee. There's been, over the years, there's been a lot of, I suppose, public debate about how Shepparton and surrounds have viewed their older buildings, and luckily now we've got an advisory committee to oversee and look at these issues. There's just some amendments. I don't need to go through them all, but I suppose it's just cleaning up the existing terms of reference, and I think it's important to keep this up to date. As I said before, Shepparton still retains a few heritage listed properties, and it's nice that we've got somebody looking after it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I am a brand new member on the Heritage Advisory Committee, and along with Councillor Abdullah. We've already had a meeting, and they're a very active committee. They meet every month, and there's a myriad of subcommittees. And part of the terms of reference is that there's some kind of participation in one of the subcommittees as well. Hopefully, it continues to have strong engagement by the community, because it's not just properties, heritage is everywhere. Sometimes it's intangible, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's a thing. So I'm interested in learning more about heritage, and hopefully through this committee that can happen. And as a new committee member, I'll respect what their terms of reference are, because that was developed by them. And moving forward, I hope that we have a very rich heritage culture that's just under the surface that we weren't aware of. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Summer. Would any council like to speak against the motion? Would any council like to speak for the motion? We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we'll now go to page 46, item 11.3, the Shepparton and Mooroopna 2050 Regional City Growth Plan. There's also a recommendation on page 46. Would a councillor like to move a motion, please? Councillor Summer?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd like to move that regarding the Shepparton and Mooroopna 2050 Regional City Growth Plan. The Council 1 notes the resolution made at the Ordinary Council meeting held on the 18th of August 2020 to defer the adoption of the Shepparton and Mooroopna 2050 Regional City Growth Plan for 6 months to allow time for extended consultation with the Greater Shepparton community. 2, notes that the additional community consultation submission period closed on the 24th of December 2020. And 3, determines to defer consideration of adoption of the Shepparton and Mooroopna 2050 Regional City Growth Plan. Full stop.
Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Brophy.
I'd
Councillor
like
Summer.
to
sorry.
second that motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brophy. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. We put a time limit on the last motion regarding this strategy, and it was all hands on deck in terms of trying to get that community consultation done, our planning staff being tied up in regards to this. From a governance perspective, it did have to come back to this meeting just because we put that time limit of 6 months. So I'm not keen to bog us down with another time limit. It is in the organisation's best interest to get this passed ASAP. So it's very likely, I've got very little doubt at all that it will be the March meeting where we deal with this. But just to give the public confidence that we want time to fully explore all of our concerns, I don't think we need to put a date. Yeah, so that's what I propose, and hopefully it's okay.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brophy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Look, this is a very important plan that we're putting forward. We did need that extra time. Thankfully, and very wisely, the previous council adopted a further 6 month and further public consultation to go along with that. That gave obviously fresh eyes and fresh understandings from a new council to have a look at the 2050 plan. A lot of it was already set in stone, but we've had submissions, we've had public submissions. I think that the public really appreciated the being able to come in and speak to the councillors and to get for us to get first-hand understanding of the competing interests that they have. It is a generational plan, so it's going to affect people. People need surety, so they need to understand, you know what their land will be going down the path. Not everyone will get their way, we know that, but I think that's what happens with competing interests. We do need to make sure that we put the overall public interest ahead of everything, individuals. Somebody said to me once that it was a bit like you playing, the electronic Sim City. Well, logistically it might be, but we're talking about real people with real lives and with real aspirations. So the extra time is certainly very valued. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any council like to speak against the motion? Would any council like to speak to the motion? Councillor Dobson?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I think it's important for the public to see that the councillors have received a report, given the fact that the new council's only been in council since December, and this report's been coming for quite some time, but it shows the public that we're in fact having a real good look at what's been put in front of us, and it's not just a matter of saying, oh well, that's it and let's accept it. There's been some terrific discussions, and I got to compliment everybody on the way it's been done. There's been some inquisitiveness, there's been some questions, there's been some answers, and I think it's important, as Councillor Brophy said, this is a generational policy that we're sort of looking at, and I think it's important that at the end of the day, the community knows that we've given this a real good look at. I'd like to congratulate the 76 odd responses that came in, and I think I read it somewhere, and I'd like to congratulate those people who came in and gave their personal responses, each of them with a different look at what have you, and the responses came from not only Shepparton but from Mooroopna. So it gave the councillors plenty of meat to look at, and I think that by the time we get there, as Councillor Brophy said, some will be happy and some won't, but we're adjudicators. We've got to take a cold hard look at this where we think it's going to be over the next 30 years, and that's why it's taking a bit of time, and I certainly endorse the motion.
Thank you very much. Would any council like to speak to the motion? Councillor Spinks?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Just briefly, because that covered off pretty much what I was going to say, to echo Councillor Dobson's comments, I'd like to thank again all of the people who did put in submissions. This is valuable with every and any consultation. We have seen them, we are hearing you, we are listening. So I encourage all community to please contribute at any point to anything that is out there. But to those who have put in submissions to the 2050 plan, I just want to take the opportunity to thank you again. To those who came in and to those who didn't, thank you very much for your time. And I also just wanted to reiterate that we, over the last 6 months, we were handed this responsibility from the previous council, and we take that very seriously. And the last 6 months has been an incredibly jam-packed schedule. And while we have now been given a large amount of information, trying to get our head around what is essentially 10 years of work, if not more, we now are at the point where we still have questions left. So we need to defer for just a moment longer to make sure that we have given this due diligence and that we are making the decision that will best serve Greater Shepparton for 30 odd years into the future. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Spinks. Will any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to item 12.1 on page 50, the road discontinuance part Shelby Court, Shepparton. There's also a recommendation on page 50. Would a council like to move a motion? Councillor Spinks.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I would like to move the recommendation to a motion as it is printed on page 50 of the agenda.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Sarley.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe.
Sorry, go, Councillor Sarley.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'll second that motion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Spinks, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. Just briefly, and I imagine that others may explain this better, but essentially what's happening here is it's a piece of land that is already owned. The court went to a certain length and now they're wanting to extend it to add more properties. The reality is there is very little impact to council. There's no cost involved. The landholders are covering the works and the costs that's involved. And I also wanted to make note that clear consultation between departments has been covered with this. I was very pleased to see that the Environment Department has been consulted at the idea of, you know, whether we could use that land to put trees on, that I was all over the last meeting. And it has been clearly discussed. Unfortunately, can't put trees there, but it's been considered. We're doing all the right things behind the scenes to make sure we're considering land for all of its purposes. Essentially, there is no real risk with this one that I can see.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sarley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe, and thank you, Councillor Spinks, as well. Yeah, look, this is a technical process to enable the court to be continued. The road in court itself won't be discontinued, obviously, as Councillor Spinks outlined, but this is a pretty straightforward planning permit where council continues to work with our developers to ensure the best outcome is met, not only for the developers, council, and most importantly, our community. So the original court will now be extended to enable further land to the east to be developed. And as mentioned, I'm sure it will provide a good outcome for all involved.
Thank you very much. Would any council wish to speak against the motion? Would any council wish to speak for the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 53, item 12.2, approval of variation for contract number 2070, Windham and Fitzgerald Street intersection works. There's also a recommendation on page 53. Would a council like to move a motion, please? Councillor Sarley?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'll move the recommendation as a motion on page 53 of the agenda, item 12.2.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Brophy? You're on mute.
Yes, I'd like to move the motion, Mayor O'Keefe. Second it, sorry. Yep.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sarley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Look, these particular challenges arise with infrastructure projects, both big and small. And this time it has exposed some concerns with the ground surface of the particular works there at Windham and Fitzgerald Street. It's important when these concerns are found that we ensure the longevity of these upgrades and the repairs are done straight away, which have been completed. Unfortunately, though, this has incurred a cost to the project, but I just want to assure the community that at this stage, the overall Windham Fitzgerald upgrade is still under the original budget. So although this is another hurdle that we've had to overcome on this particular project, I'm very confident that the works will be completed within the original allocated budget. For those that frequent the area, and we constantly hear it from Councillor Spinks, that you will notice the project is almost completed. We're just awaiting the install of the traffic lights, which shouldn't be too far away.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brophy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, just very briefly. Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. This is another variant that for approval that we had at the last council meeting, where there were different variants again, and this will come up from time to time. It's very rare to see that the variant comes through that it's actually less than what that they want. I'm probably going to bang on about that probably throughout the council term, because I think there's a bit of an anomaly in the way that this is always, presented, etc. Looking at it, it could have been worse. It could have been 300,000, to the detriment, but it was offset by some drainage scope changes that we got some money back on, $73,000 worth. Still in the red in terms of 221,000, but as Councillor Saleh did rightly point out, it still falls under the budget, so I'm actually quite comfortable now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brophy. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak for the motion? Councillor Dobson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I just wanted to let ratepayers know that we were briefed fairly solidly on this issue, and there was a lot of questions asked. And you're quite right, Councillor Saleh. It was to do with some of the undersurface at the roadway, and it's a very good job they've done down there. But if we hadn't have done what we did, it could have been within 12 months. We could have been back repairing it again. So, but I just wanted to stress the point that this wasn't just went through. We had a very long and thoughtful discussion on the issue. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Just on Councillor Dobson's comments, if people from out there care to read about the detail, we have a very comprehensive report in our agenda, and that helped me feel comfortable. Not only was it verbally projected to us, it was also in writing. This is what happened. We had line items out there that showed us these are the costs, and yes, it's still under budget. So unlike last time where it's just one little mistake can accelerate into hundreds of thousands of dollars, this one I'm more than comfortable with. So well done to the staff for actually informing us.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Spinks?
Just very briefly, and thank you to Councillor Saleh for pointing out, I do often get stuck in those roadworks while I'm getting my morning coffee, as do most of, or a large portion of community. And I thought I'd just take the opportunity to let our wonderful community know that those roadworks should be wrapping up in the very near future, so we can all get our coffees and get on with our days.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 58, item 12.3, approval of variation for contract number 2032, Maud Street stages 3 and 4, replacement of water main. There's also a recommendation on page 58. Would the council like to move a motion, please? Councillor Dobson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I move the recommendation is that the council authorise payment of a variation 1 under contract 2032 Maud Street stages 3 and 4, replacement of water main for a total value of 53,982.50, including GST, and authorise the Chief Executive Officer to approve additional variation payments up to cumulative limit of $25,000, including GST.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Sarley.
I'll second that motion, Mayor O'Keefe.
Councillor Dobson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. These are works that we'll never see, of course, below the surface. But as everybody knows, we're redoing Maud Street, and this is some of the stuff that had to be done. It was found that once we had a look at the water mains, they need to be replaced. But the good news about this is that we get reimbursed for it by Goulburn Valley Water. So it would have been better if it had been $500,000. We'd get no, I can't say that. But it's good that we do get reimbursed by Goulburn Valley Water, and that the works are being done as we speak. So there we go.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dobson. Councillor Sarley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Look, as I mentioned in the previous agenda item, that regardless of the infrastructure project, there is always the risk of incurring additional works that weren't forecasted, which provides obviously the challenge for our council staff. In this case, as Councillor Dobson mentioned, it's been identified that we replace the services from the water main now in Maud Street to avoid further disruptions in the future. Services from the water main weren't scheduled to be replaced, but parts of Maud Street right now are already enduring significant disruptions, which most of you would already be aware of. So clearly, the logical step would be to replace the water services now to avoid another round of disruptions once major works would be completed. As Councillor Dobson noted, this is easy to approve on the fact that let's do the work now. GV Water own infrastructure, so we'll be reimbursed for the additional costs incurred to council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sarley. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak for the motion? We will now go to the... Oh, sorry, Councillor Summer, would you like to speak for the motion?
I was just going to say the enormity of the project. It's, as everybody's aware, the entire street has been ripped out and it's having a renewal. So it's a huge project and we're definitely going to have some form of variation. So this is quite minor, especially since we're being reimbursed for it. And it's been 8 years waiting for this project and I'm so excited, and I hope the community tolerates the disruption because it's going to look pretty good once it's done.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, if you go to page 62, documents for signing and sealing, we have nil received. If you go to page 63, item 14.1, council or activities, there's a recommendation also on page 63. Would a councillor like to move the motion? Councillor Brophy.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I would like to move that the recommendation become a motion that the summary of the councillors' community interaction and briefing program be received and record of assemblies of councillors be noted. There's a number of ones listed down there.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Priestley. Councillor Brophy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just quickly to say that the councillors have been out and about and been very active in the last, the very first few months of their coming into council. In fact, you walk down the street and you run into your fellow councillors talking with different people outside the shops in different places around the Goulburn Valley, whether it be in Tatura or Murchison or Dookie. It's always good to see fellow councillors and being invited to a number of things. There was one that I noticed that hasn't been put on there, but that was the Shepparton Cycling Club Boxing Day, where there was a number of councillors there giving out trophies, etc., to the award winners there. But it's just really terrific to see that already early in our term that we're out and about.
Thank you very much. Councillor Priestley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd just like to note, I guess, that it's great to see, despite the lockdown this week, that councillors are active and out there in the community. And I'd also like to compliment our Mayor, Mayor O'Keefe, who's doing a great job, working really hard, seeming to fit in about 9 functions a day. So keep up the great work. And lastly, that for our small towns and communities, that councillors are actively discussing at the moment how we can be more present in our small towns. So if you've got ideas about that, pick up the phone or drop us an email, and we're keen to engage, because that's something we're planning and organising for at the moment. So you're going to see more of our faces. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Priestley. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Abdullah?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I would just like to say that, you know, this is so pleasing to see that events were back, because we know that last year things were so different. But, you know, that's the thing, that in my last term, I realized that in the very first year, we had events and you would also recall, Mayor O'Keefe and Councillor Summer, that we had events every other day. And there was not a day which was without an event. So at the end of the month, we had a whole long list of events where councillors had, which councillors had attended and interacted with the community. And of course, these events and forums are such a fabulous way of knowing our community better and knowing their problems and issues and all the great work that they've been doing. So I really hope that going forward, COVID restrictions, once they are lifted, we have more and more of these events, and councillors will be very much happy and pleased to be part of those events, and we look forward to attending more and more community events. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Abdullah. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to Councillor Summer.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Just what Councillor Abdullah said inspired me there. Every single event that we go to, we get a different perspective from somewhere. There's a reward in every single event we attend, and we are so blessed to be invited to all of these things that happen across our municipality that we wouldn't know about as a general public member of the public. So hopefully these restrictions don't last too long, because I'm sure we all want to get back out and about, but very valuable, yes.
Thank you very much, Councillor Summer. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 65, item 14.2, Council Committee Reports. Item 14.2.1, the Murray-Darling Association, is also a recommendation on page 65. The council would like to move a motion. Councillor Sali.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Yeah, I'll move the recommendation as a motion on page 65 of the agenda.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor James.
Thanks, Mayor O'Keefe. Yes, happy to second that motion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sali, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, I will briefly. Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Yeah, look, I just really appreciate Councillor Dobson for providing us with this update. We know how important water security is for our region, and Councillor Dobson, this update shows why it's very important to have good representation, not only from our council, but from our community on this particular working group. And as I mentioned, when you put your hand up to sit on this particular committee, that you were the right person. You've got to have a knowledge about water security, and we're very grateful that you're representing, as I mentioned, not only the council but the community. And I'm very, very appreciative of you providing this update for us as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sali. Councillor James, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe, and thanks Councillor Sali for his comments. I think it's really important that we have a strong position and a voice on with regards to this association. You know, our council has had committed representation from our previous ex-councillor, Councillor Dennis Patterson. He spent a lot of time and raised the focus and pointed out to our community and highlighted the need for us to really look at our river system and for us to, you know, to continue on and really address our issue of our waterways and to beautify that, and, you know, and to make our community aware of that, you know, the Goulburn River is heritage listed, and to really, you know, really focus on that. So, I'd like to thank ex-councillor Dennis Patterson for his work and commend him for his work that he has done. Recently, Councillor Dobson was elected to the executive of the Region 2 district, which takes in Corowa, Berrigan, Moira and the Edward Rivers Shires as well. So it's a very responsible position, and we have the right person for the job. So again, reiterate that, and once again thank our ex-councillor Dennis Patterson for his contribution too as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Priestley?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Firstly, just wanted to say thank you to Councillor Dobson, doing a great job on there, and highlight a point in his report here where he talks about a further concern is the potential creation of a diversion channel to bypass Barmer Choke, which will have an effect on the Barmer National Park. And, you know, just I guess to wax lyrical a little bit about water policy, that we're at a time where the organisation responsible for the environmental management of our river system is contemplating building a drain from a World Heritage listed area to an almond farming area. Doesn't make a lot of sense. It's going to have dire consequences for our region, and as an organisation we need to be absolutely vocal and on the front foot about this. It's just absolute environmental, economic. There's no common sense whatsoever in it. So looking forward to speaking more publicly about that and putting a bit of our perspective on that approach back to the MDBA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Priestley. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Gropey?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Just reiterating what Councillor James had said in regards to former Councillor Dennis Patterson. Pato is very well known for his work and his advocacy in this particular area. He's gone in boots. I mean, his management of taking on that particular role about water resources, mirrors his obviously his fishing as well, which is really highlighted. But to see then Councillor Dobson, jump off the high tower straight into the water, if you like, as soon as we came on board, because this needed to be taken up very early in our term, and he did it so without batting an eyelid. And I'd like to congratulate Councillor Dobson on that, because we've certainly got the right person at the helm for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Dobson.
Yeah, just quickly, I appreciate the comments made by my fellow councillors, and just to add to the comments that on Thursday, it was Shepparton's turn to host the MDA for our meeting. And instead of being in Shepparton, I'd organised with Yorta Yorta Nations to have the meeting at Yambina, which is up at Barmer, and we were going to be addressed by some members of Yorta Yorta Nations, some of the field officers and people who are involved in the Barmer National Park, just to give us a perspective of what it all means from an Aboriginal point of view. That now has been scuttled by COVID, so we're going to do it by Zoom, but we'll get back to it. And I think it's very important, and we've started the process now of engaging fully with Yorta Yorta Nations as one of our partners in developing our plans further on. And the other part that may be of interest is that at the meeting, I'm hoping to get agreement to improve our membership, but I can't say too much about that now, but more will come at a later date. But I appreciate the support. It's very humbling. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dobson. Would any other councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer?
I'd just like to say that how great it is that someone's using that report from councillor section in the agenda. It's really good to see that. It shows how enthusiastic we are on the front foot. Don't be shy doing that. There are some protocols around what you can and can't put in there. I've been knocked back quite a few times, but we're never critical, obviously. We're going to encourage each and every one of you, and this shows the public what we stand for, what's important to us, and the level of depth that we get into when it comes to these things. So, yeah, like to see more of that. It's good.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any other councillor like to speak to the motion? Just before we go to the vote, Councillor Dobson, I'd just like to again thank you for that report. It's great and it keeps us up to date, and that's really important. Water's the key, number one thing I think within our community to keep fighting for and having a voice for. So we need for that to continue, and I'm really excited to think that we're continuing that work now that Councillor Patterson isn't with us, and I know that he'd also be very pleased to see this particular associate you on that particular committee, and it in good hands for council. So we're looking forward to continuing the fight and really watching out for our water within our region. So well done. We'll go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. We now go to item 14.3, notice of motion, amendment or rescission. Nil received. Item 15, urgent business not included on the agenda. Nil received. Just prior to closing the meeting, we'd just like to make sure all our community are safe and keeping well, make sure everyone's got their masks. We're hoping tomorrow there might be some further announcements, fingers crossed, but in the meantime, just stay safe and look after each other. And we'll see you soon. Close the meeting at 7 minutes to 7. Thank you.